Welcome, everybody, back to the podcast UX Design to Win in Business. My name is Nils, co-founder at Dinghy, and today I have a first-time guest on the show, our UX research specialist, Nosipho. Maybe you can do like a quick intro about yourself to tell everyone who you are and what you do at Dinghy and all of this sort of stuff.
Cool. Hi, my name is Nosipho. I am a UX researcher based at Dinghy. I've been with the company for about 2 years. I deal with 3 years, going on 3, yeah. So I deal mainly with UX research and everything internal as well as some client-facing work, mainly user testing, other methodologies that pertain to UX research, of which we'll be going through in this podcast. I'm really excited about that. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Very cool. Yeah, so since you're here for the first time, I talked about it on the show a couple times already, but I think it makes it so much more tangible when a specialist like you in the field is actually on the show. So I think our story, UX research, just to make this a little bit more accessible for everybody listening to this, we came out of slinging websites for our customers. Like we designed them and we coded them, and then we kind of left them with this new website to do something amazing about it. And one of the big realizations was that even during development, we always had this opinion face-off where we as the agency said, we need more pictures and less text. And potentially the customer said, but we have to explain our product a lot better, so the text has to be longer. And all sorts of discussions like that when it came to websites. Then the same thing for apps, like the company or the customer thinks we should implement this feature first, and we think we should implement that feature first, and what is even the minimum viable product, and yada, yada, yada. I think anyone who worked on a digital product before, even if it's just your own marketing website, can probably relate to these sort of discussions or this experience working with agencies before. And we came to the realization that neither us as the designers at the agency nor our contract, like our customers, were really the users of the product we were talking about. And I think this is the point where you came into play, right? Like, I mean, we actually met on LinkedIn, and Nosipho thankfully applied to our job description. Nosi, can you maybe explain a little bit where UX research fits in when thinking about either designing a website or an app? Like, pick whichever example you like.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, the problem that we had at Dinghy prior to me joining was that clients didn't really know their user. They had assumptions about the user and they had this plan that they wanted to see through. Designers at Dinghy were given the problem to solve and were made to put out designs. And after putting out these designs, clients would come back with specific problems, and there'd just be this back and forth between designer and client. And that's where my role comes in, by giving information that both the client and the designer can use to make informed decisions when it comes to products and designing apps and websites, etc. So what I do is I go in there, I understand the problem, identify who your users are, I go and speak to your users, and then I come back with facts about who your users are, what do they want, what are their needs, what are their frustrations, and possible recommendations that the entire team can use moving forward. So both the business and the designer are on the same page, and they're able to ideate together as to what is the best possible solution to solving the specific problem or achieving the required design or target KPIs that the business might have.
And so I guess that listeners of this podcast, if you're like a decision maker at a medium-sized company or something it's probably not so typical for a startup, but we had a lot of customers who had prior experience with activities like market research, for example. And so the preoccupation with when we came along and said, look, we have to talk to your customers, otherwise we will never know what is the right approach to whatever we're building here. And often the response was, Yeah, I know. We did market research and it was super long and expensive. And like I don't know, the agency who was hired kind of dove away for 3 months and then came back with this 100-page document where I couldn't even necessarily make out the relevant information to take a decision on what we have to make. I guess like user research in general is probably not necessarily a new term or like a brand new activity. Maybe you could expand a little bit on how we're trying to take a different approach into this
Yeah.
direction and how to really integrate this into something that gets you value out of the whole process instead of being long and complicated.
Yeah, definitely. So, something interesting that you mentioned is that user research is not new. And how I like to think of it is that it's developing. So, we might have started off with just general research, we moved into market research, we move into user research. Like, they're all aspects of research, just with different aims. So, the aim of user experience research is to understand the user and to ensure that their experience when using an app or website is as intuitive and human centered as possible. Speaking from a market research perspective, I don't know much, but my assumption is that it's rooted in understanding the target audience and creating marketing initiatives that's targeted towards the audience. So with user experience, we deal more with the user experience of it all. And something quite interesting that I think all researchers have is that we have the same basis. Our basis is rooted in curiosity. And I think that's what fuels a lot of our work. Just curious about whether it's people, whether it's business, whether it's market, etc. And that's something that we put into our work, just trying to deeply understand the problem at hand. And coming back to your question or misconception about user experience research, that businesses often feel like it's really expensive. You're stuck with a whole lot of documentation that you don't have the time to go through. And sometimes it might not even be easily understood by stakeholders who are not within the design space, who are not within the digital space, who might be business focused, who might be accounting focused, etc. So basically the way in which we do it at Dinghy is quite different from all the other spaces that I've worked in that we devised a methodology that is rooted in rapid results. So the stereotypical way of doing user experience research or really digging deeply into research problems is that it usually does take a bit of time because you want to be as meticulous as possible. You want to be as thorough in your results and in your research methodologies and practices. However, at Dinghy, we prioritize still coming through with impactful results, but also taking into account that it doesn't have to be a huge research project. I mean, we've had several discussions with many stakeholders with regards to how many people we speak to.
Yeah.
And yeah, we prioritize speaking to between 3, 5, 8 users. And that's usually a shocker for most stakeholders, right? They're like, why in market research looking
Everyone asks me about this. Like, how can this be enough? Are you nuts? We have to
exactly.
ask 100 people, right?
Exactly. The thing is, when there's a problem, 3 people will point out that problem. When you get to the fifth person will be pointing out the exact same problem. So what we do is that we prioritize between 3 and 5 users per target audience. So if we're trying to solve for a problem, we'd probably have 3 to 5 users per target audience, and then we'll take it from there. And usually, Niels, you've sat through several user testing sessions, and by the third user, you know exactly what's wrong with the product. You know exactly where the stumbling blocks are. You know exactly where the confusion is. And I think that's really the joy of being really close to your user, that you're able to see these interactions live and direct and very obvious. So that's a way in which we ensure that our results are quite rapid. Also, the tie between the designer, the product owner, the research team, having very close alliances between these departments ensure that insights are easily accessible, that they're able to understand exactly what's going on, that they're able to see documentation of where the user struggled and where we can improve. So in most cases, they're these like distinct silos, But because at Dinghy we're quite a small agency, we're able to have that close communication between each other. As well as when we're working with clients, we really prioritize staying in contact with the team and bringing them closer into the world of the users, that they're able to understand what the problems and the issues are.
Totally.
So yeah.
I think, yeah, one thing that absolutely blew my mind when you came in was, yeah, I had the same preconception. I thought, or I had the question of how will this work together? Because I had, the experience of when we get going with design and coding for a website, for example, then sometimes we'd be done in like 4 weeks. And I couldn't really imagine how we can squeeze in testing into this time frame at all.
Yeah.
But we also always had this issue of we took away the design and the dev process, and we were like an integrated team in that sense that designers and developers at Dinghy are mostly both at the same time, so we can move relatively quickly. And so I knew that this bridging the gap already worked because there was like a lot less handoff to be done between the two roles. And so when I realized that when you were setting up a usability test, for example, and that's also honing in on the topic that we're talking about more specifically today, then that was not for the entire website or the entire app or not for 100 people. But the test was 4 sections on the homepage and maybe a click-through to a contact form. And just the validation of, look, here's in the setting of a user test where you're on a one-on-one call, you send like the link for the click dummy or for whatever you have to use, ask them to share the screen, and you can follow what's happening. And that you always get this validation of either, like you can see it in their eyes, you can of course see it in the cursor, but so I was really nervous when I went into the first usability test as the person interviewing or observing the test, so to say. But it was like crystal clear to me in a second, doing this for the first time, that my job is to really just observe and maybe probe if somebody is shy to say something. But generally, they do the whole thing. Like they look at whatever you have, and if you see like the little triangle of sadness crinkling up here, on your forehead, then you know something doesn't make sense, because people look that way if something doesn't make sense. And it can be so little as the label of the call to action button makes them a little bit worried about where it might take them, or if there's a picture, they either don't understand what it's showing, or really simple things you can just find out in half an hour session. And as you said, by the 3rd or 4th session, I'm kind of willing to bet what will go wrong. And all of this can be done in like a day or two, and then you're set out to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in this sense, I think what we're trying to get across, especially in the podcast format for our business listeners, is where's the value creation? Like, how does this really make the result better, faster, or even cheaper? And to get to the bottom of this, so we're here to talk about usability testing today. Before we dive into that, Nosi, maybe you can give us like a little bit of an overview of the different activities that go into UX research, and where we can find usability testing on the spectrum.
Of course. So let's take, for example, you have a founder who comes through with a dream. They haven't really started anything yet, but they just have this idea of something that they know is going to work. So as a UX researcher, the first thing that you do is discovery. And by discovery research, you're trying to understand what market you're in, who are your users, what is your idea, how will your idea work out, what are people's perceptions of the idea, what are people's current problems. And I feel like in this space is where market research also ties in quite closely.
Yeah.
So at the end of discovery research, you'll be able to tell the founder more about who their target audience is, what their product might look like, what they should try and solve for, and how they go about doing it. Thereafter, you go into ideation. So in ideation, you're trying to come up with really fresh ideas as to how to solve this problem. There are a bunch of different methodologies you can use. You can try tree. What's the one that the tree
The the
method?
decision tree thing, where
Decision
the
tree, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
opportunity solution tree.
Opportunity,
Yeah,
yes, yes,
that's a
that's the
fancy
one.
term.
Opportunity solution tree. You can try opportunity solution tree. You can try putting up white. You can write on whiteboards. You can have different. What's the? Whenever we have a client, we initially begin with brainstorming sessions. Just different ways to try and get ideas flowing as to how you can solve for this problem. Thereafter, we'd go into designing the product. So insights that come from discovery would help inform the designing of this product. While designing, one thing that we do at Dinghy that really helps is to not use a test at the end, but use a test simple wireframes. It literally can be a drawing on a piece of paper, and we will go and ask someone, what do you think of this? Does this solve for your problem? And we're always able to get insights. So no matter how small or how low fidelity a wireframe might be, it's still able to be tested. So usability testing comes in at this phase. We like to prioritize it quite early because we're able to help guide designers in designing of this product, as well as we're able to test at the end whether whatever they have designed is a great solve. So usually this happens in cycles of continuous testing. So we'd have a page, we'd test, we'd produce results, we'd have a page, we'll test, we produce the results. So by the end of, let's say, 4 weeks, we have a product that's designed and that's tested and that we're confident that can go into development. And reason for testing so early and so consistently is that it saves so much money in the beginning to ensure that you have a product that actually works than taking it into development and there's so many issues that are picked up at this stage. Not only does it save resources, it saves time as well because your development team is able to develop a product that actually works and your consumers are able to enjoy a product that they like and that works well, as opposed to your customer getting this product and it's an absolute flop and it has to go right to the beginning and you've already lost that trust that you have with your client. That's where usability sort of starts, and that's why we advocate for consistent testing, usability testing.
Awesome. And I mean, for me, this was literally a mind-blowing paradigm shift when we started to work that way, because we just started to work for my former employer 10 years ago. We started to work for SumUp again. And what I remember from my startup days in Berlin was everyone wanted to move super fast. Of course, it's startup land. There's a high load of pressure. There's this big idea that you want to get out. And if there's one discussion that just always happened and stuck in my mind forever, was the MVP discussion. Like, what will the minimum viable product be that will be enough to launch to the public or to beta test with a closed group of first customers or however you're going to go to market? What is the feature set that we are all willing to commit to, that we don't overshoot? Because the one thing that we always did in the end, because of internal stakeholder discussions, was to increase the scope of the MVP. And that led to more features being implemented before the first user ever saw this product. And that also internally just increased the pressure on the whole thing, because the expectations were rising for everything to go right because we were not on the market yet. And then it also made the validation of the released product so much harder, because there's not one thing that you're trying to validate if you did it right or not, but then you suddenly have 10 features. And so I'm thinking of a project we did last summer, for example, where the pressure was high and we had to move fast. And that was Relayer, where we did this usability testing. That literally, like, I don't know, like the learnings from this that kind of made my brain pop out of my head, because that would have been a catastrophe if we didn't have done it. So yeah, maybe you can describe the process on that just a little bit, on how we approached it. I
Yes.
think it's reiterating what you already said, but it's on a
Yeah.
practical example.
Yeah. So, what I really enjoyed about that project is that oftentimes user experience research is kind of forgotten and is thought of as an afterthought, and also is thought of as delaying an agile and very fast moving project. However, this is quite the latter when it's actually factored in. So, this project is the perfect depiction of user experience research being factored into the whole process. So, right from the beginning, the researcher was informed that, look, you'll be working on this project and factor in your research from the beginning. And I think this really helps with user experience research because you're able to factor in your research in a way that ensures that you're delivering on time, that helps move the project forward. So we started off, we were tasked with redesigning a website, and the marketing team had KPIs that they needed to meet. Business had KPIs that they needed to meet, as well as the designers having KPIs that they needed to meet. So we began with an initial kickoff where everyone's goals were brought to the forefront, and our team was made aware of what the task was and what the issues were. So beginning this project, we were able to all sit together and create a very minimal wireframe with just content blocks that the marketing team was able to give the okay, business was able to give the okay, as well as research and design was able to give the okay. So I'm a huge advocate for collaboration because I think this project was so successful because everyone was quite open, everyone gave input, and there was constant discussions amongst us as to what works well, what doesn't work well. So thereafter, marketing, something that I absolutely really enjoyed is that marketing had a calculator that they really thought would be great. However, there was internal discussions between the team and business as to whether this is good or not, whether this will work or not. And this was handed over to the research team, and we were able to go and speak to our users and ask, look, is this something that you actually want? And 100% of all the users that we spoke to said, no, we don't want this. We don't trust it. It doesn't make sense. Instead, we would like to speak to people within the business. We'd like to speak to call center agents, as well as we'd like to actually see testimonials. That's a way in which builds trust with us, the client. And I think this was quite revolutionary because we were able to prioritize testimonials on the homepage that we were working on, as well as canceling the calculator as an entire element. And something that was quite interesting about that is that this calculator was going to cost the business thousands per month. And by understanding that the user doesn't want this, and by removing this, we're able to save the business thousands. And I think this is quite a testimony to how important user experience research is when it's factored in, as well as it's being taken seriously, because we're able to both save resources, ensure that you're able to build trust with your user, and we're able to communicate this directly to the responsible teams so that they're able to make more informed decisions. So I think that was a really great project, as we're able to see quite vividly what happens when UX research is brought in at the right time, as well as the insights are used correctly.
Totally. And maybe this is a good time to talk about if we do it so rapidly, and if this is integrated week to week in the design process, maybe we have to speak a little bit about who are the test participants? Like, who are we talking to? Because I assume that people, at least I got that question ramping up projects a lot, was when I said, look, we'll integrate usability testing into the design process, if you like it or not. This is going to happen. But don't worry, this is not going to take weeks. Like, this is kind of done before you even know that we started to design. This is like a 2 days activity. And then I ask, so who's your user group? Like, who is this for? if we didn't do the discovery testing with the customer because they came with a solid briefing already, they have an idea about it. And so I remember in this case, the customer group was just super specific because this was IoT, industry IoT solutions. So Relayer has like a little sensor that you jam onto any rotating equipment that you have in any industrial plant, so to say, and that will record vibrations, will send the data about those vibrations to a central server and can then predict when this machine will maybe have a failure because of fancy pants machine learning knowledge and all of that sort of stuff. So customers for this website were such a niche that it was really hard to find whoever we had to talk to. And in this case, we asked the customer if they can pick relevant people from their network, because in this case, it was really hard to get the correct people, right? So when talking to participants in usability testing, we have to make sure that they are the ones who are going to be using this product, right? And remember clever cards, like you were in this testing with the accounting people, right? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that one too. I found that interesting.
So luckily with UX research, we're able to identify platforms of which we're able to get to this very specific niche that you described. But also, most of the time, business has access to the user. So we require both a willing client who's able to connect us with their actual user, as well as using our network, our platforms, our recruitment methods to get to the specific users that we need. So sometimes it can be a bit tricky, but I think we've perfected using the correct platforms and networks that we have, recruitment platforms and networks, as well as luckily in our case, most of our clients have been super open and have been able to connect us directly with who their target audience is and who we should speak to and how these people would be of value to the project that we're working on.
Yeah, and then it's also that makes the whole thing a lot faster, of course, if you don't talk to 100 people, but to 3, and also much cheaper, right? Like much more manageable. You know who these people are going to be. You can get to them again. And just to make this, maybe to really drive it home with the relay example from last summer, what was so crucial about this was, as you mentioned, they had KPIs to reach till end of the year. The website went live by beginning of September, so they had literally 4 months remaining for advertising and to reach all of those goals. And since the target group of this product is so specific, they already had noted down what the acquisition cost per lead would be, or what they imagine it would be, and that was like north of like $200 each. And so these people, what they told us during usability testing was they are all the CEO or very high up management of industrial companies who are considering to apply this product to a whole bunch of machines they have running in their plants. And their message was, it's very nice that you're trying to show me through this return on invest calculator how amazing your product is. But I can do this in my head. Like, this is my job day to day, all right? And if you give me like a simple ass calculator on your website, I don't believe that this is thorough. Like, how on earth are you good? Like, it can't be this simple. And I know that because that's my job. What I'm interested in, details about the product, like how long does it take to apply, like how complicated it is. Do you have to get on my network? Do you not have to get on my network? Is this a risk to my machines? Like all that sort of stuff. And so by learning this 2 months ahead of the website launch and not after the website launch, marketing team was able to adjust all of their messaging to important product details and not to high-level bullshit bingo that nobody was interested in, right? And that was such a landslide win for this project that I really still love to talk about it.
I think what I really enjoy about the example that you brought up is that oftentimes as internal stakeholders, we have this idea about our user. We think we understand them. We think we know exactly what they need. And every single time after interviews or usability testing or whatever method is used, we always find out that it's actually completely different. Your
Exactly.
users have different ideas and needs and wants from what you think that they need. And with the example that you mentioned, the user actually wanted more in-depth information. They had specific questions that they needed answered. They needed testimonials to ensure that I know that this works. And these are things that the marketing team had no idea of. But this came out recurringly during user interviews. So it's quite important to prioritize this research because it's then that you'll really, really come to understand your user, and all facets of the business will benefit from this information. From marketing to business to everyone in the business will genuinely really, really benefit from this information.
Yes, so cool. So, and you illustrated before a little bit what the spectrum of UX are, right? So usability testing is something, if you have anything, this also works with an existing product, I suppose, right? Like
Yes.
if you wanted to learn something about an existing product, you could apply the same method, have someone use it and observe what they do. I think it's important to understand that this is something that's quick, that doesn't test the entire thing in one go, but that is very, I think it aligns very well with agile way of working, right? I think that is also, you addressed this before already, but it's really important to understand that testing done this way it's actually not more work. So what I learned in the last 3 years is it's so hard to wrap my head around it. Like it was so hard to wrap my head around it that it's an extra activity, so it kind of must be more effort. But the opposite is the case. Like I never came out of a testing session that either I conducted or looked at learnings that you produced from a session and thought, yeah, that was absolutely obvious. I knew that before. That was, I think, not the case, never, not once. And that is
Yeah.
super surprising to me because I always thought, I'm a UX designer for 12 years now. Like, how different can an app be? Like, you kind of know, well, the button goes to the lower right, and you have to kind of make a difference between a link and a button, and the image can't be too close or too distracting. And you know all these principles, of course, that's like our expertise, but still. And
Yeah.
yeah, right?
Yeah, no, human beings are really complex, and the way in which human beings' brains works, it never works how you think they would. And a lot of our decisions are informed by our surroundings, our access to different devices, our needs, our wants, our socioeconomic status. That all plays into the way in which we use certain products. And by uncovering that information, that helps inform us as to how we need to design for our users. And the way in which I would think of something is very different from the way in which you would think of something. So, with our research, we're trying to uncover the different ways in which people think, so that we're able to create products that's able to reach our entire target audience. So, yeah, I can definitely see how oftentimes you'd go in with a specific idea and you'd come out and your idea is completely wrong. Like, no one ever thought like
Exactly.
that. Yeah. I think that's one of the joys of UX research is that you need to be comfortable with being wrong. And oftentimes we're all very wrong. Like we go in thinking that, no, this is definitely going to work. Very user friendly, perfect design. And you come out and like, how did I not see that? That's so obvious. Obviously, this button was never going to work after the user has pointed out to you. So,
Right? That is
yeah,
also super cool. Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah.
I think that's an important point that you're making. You have to be open to being wrong. And I don't want this to come across as snarky, but I've had my fair share of projects in the space. And I think next to the MVP discussion or actually along the lines of the MVP discussion, where usually the one, especially in startups, where you have this huge vision for your idea that you want to implement and you have like a very specific outline for what the product is going to be, it's very hard as the decision maker to take a step back and to agree to only releasing 2 features instead of the 7 that you had in mind, right? And if someone comes along and says, well, that's a very nice idea, but maybe let's check with your users if this is actually true. The impulse, as especially the startup founder, but it's not only, this doesn't only apply to startups in my experience, the impulse to say, well, I conceived this idea, I know who I'm doing this for. Like I've been, in often cases, the idea came from being in the problem space themselves. So
Yeah.
obviously, they must know the solution, right? And I'm not saying that that's not the case, but the nuances in releasing the individual features and how they work specifically for users, that is something that is usually out of your control and also out of the imaginable space. Because as you said, all your users are different. They are in different places. The requirements are different. And if you have a great feature idea, then that doesn't mean that you know exactly how it's going to work. Like, what is the exact interaction of this entire thing? So usability testing is not something to prove you wrong. It's actually something enable your idea to work for real. Because
Yeah.
software development is hard and the road is long and winding, and usability testing is just something to put you on the right path and to, after all, make the whole experience just less frustrating. Because what's more frustrating than finally being done and everybody hates your feature?
Yeah, that is horrible. Yeah, I think sometimes when you are tied to the creation of a product, you sort of become blind to the product as it is. I remember this one time we were working on a wireframe and I was working with Daniel and I was working quite closely with him. So getting very, very involved in the design process. And we scheduled a user test for the next week. And I was so certain, I was like, this is perfect. I know it is. This is great. And I got into the user test and they obliterated the wireframe. They were like, this doesn't work. This doesn't make sense. This is wrong. Why is there a typo? This isn't going to work. And I feel like when you are so close to the creation of something, you don't really see it as a whole rounded product. It's only when you take a step back and you are completely separated from it, that's when you're able to see it as it really is. And usability testing or user experience research as a whole allows you to take that step back and gain a different perspective as to how it actually works. When we're testing with people, they aren't tied to this project. They don't have certain prejudices or a deep wanting for this product to work. They're just using it according to their needs and they're able to pinpoint what works and what doesn't work. And when you're in the position of designing this project, you don't have that perspective. So we're able to bring you that perspective, not in a way to tell you that your idea is horrible, but more in a way to ensure that your product succeeds. And I think ensuring that you design and create something that succeeds is much better than holding on to a dream and never seeing it through. Yeah, I think that's the real joy and the real importance of user experience research.
Awesome. I That's a beautiful way of saying this. I think it's also a beautiful way of wrapping up this episode. We at Dinghy are in the month of usability testing. We really, in the form of this podcast, in the blog posts where you also created one or two, I believe, we are trying to make UX research in general, usability testing, we're trying to get the message across that this is not optional anymore, especially in the entire landscape of generative AI, products popping out of everywhere in such a rapid pace, even quicker than before, that we believe your only distinguishing factor, after all, will be that people have a good experience when coming in contact with your organization, when using your products. This is all very closely related to how people talk about brand, and arguments are actually also very comparable. So ask yourself, if you use a product, then you only do that because you remember that this does what you want. You only use Amazon because you know that whatever you order is actually going to be there tomorrow or the day after. If they would skip on this promise for a couple times, you would probably consider not using Amazon anymore. And that is the case with your product too. Like in most cases, it doesn't have to be snazzy. Like nobody is in this, as you said, with the passion for using your product just for the sake of using it. Like everybody's trying to do something with your thing. And if they can't, they're not going to. That's it. So getting the entire user experience from discovery of your organization all the way to staying a loyal customer is in big parts the user experience journey. And usability testing is one part of it that is important to repeat every once in a while and to ensure that you're still on track. So, Nosi, thank you for taking the time and coming on today. Really enjoyed this conversation, and maybe we can see you in the future again.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Niels, for having me. It was such an amazing time. I really enjoyed discussing usability testing and user research with you.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Stay tuned for everything we have in usability testing and for other topics next week. Bye.